Hello everyone, my name's Radio Mike, this is the Inside of My Mind, and I noticed recently that we've just started the month of May, so we're actually nearly halfway through 2020, which is so crazy because it feels like everything's just been put on hold and stopped because of everything that's been going on recently. And I've really started thinking about some of the stuff that I've really enjoyed so far this year in terms of media, and I wanted to spend some time talking about the new Strokes album, The New Abnormal, which so far has been one of the strongest albums I've heard all year. I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm still listening to it and spending some time with it, despite the fact that it's probably been out for about 2 months now. But this album is so good, and I feel as though I'm a big believer in branding your albums and an artist branding their releases and you know, that's everything from the track titles to the album title to the album art and everything in between, creating this like coherent messaging that an album needs. And in this case, I think that the Strokes have done a really good job at creating an image for this album, which is called The New Abnormal. And I think that The New Abnormal is such an apt name for an album like this, because as someone like me who doesn't know very much about the Strokes other than their amazing debut album, Is This It?, which actually came out a very long time ago, so there's quite a big gap between their first album and this, which is, I think, their fourth or fifth album. And I haven't heard really any of their other work. I think that calling this The New Abnormal is really, really good as a branding tool, because this album isn't what you would expect if you've only sort of casually listened to the Strokes over the years. Like, you take an album like Is This It?, which is, you know, quite a punchy indie rock album, a chilled out indie rock album that, you know, doesn't have extremely long tracks. The tracks are quite short. The tracks are quite catchy. You know, the lead single to that album is Last Night. That's probably their most famous song, and it is a great song. The album opener is called, is the title track as well, Is This It? Again, a really chill song, but The New Abnormal is full of very long songs, very drawn out, complex songs. There's a lot of dense production, particularly in the vocals on a lot of tracks, and I think that there's a lot happening in this album that really suits the title, The New Abnormal. This isn't what you'd expect from the Strokes necessarily. And it's all kind of spearheaded by this song, Bad Decisions, which is the lead single on the album, and it is an extremely catchy song and definitely the most commercially viable song on this album. It does sort of adhere to that upbeat verse, bridge, chorus kind of structure that pop songs use and that commercially viable songs use. It's a very accessible song that draws very heavily from the Billy Idol song Dancing With Myself, to the point that Billy Idol is actually credited as a writer on the song. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I know that sometimes when artists write songs that they think are really good and then they're like, shit, this sounds a lot like this other song, but I don't want to just throw out this song, they just add that artist's name to the writer's credit so they kind of get away with it. Nonetheless, this is a great song. It really, really surprised me. It's almost like pop punky kind of vibes. Like, I actually got a vibe of like the new Blink-182 with Matt Skiba. Like, the vocals in this are really Skiba-ish if you're familiar with his vocal style. It was really like, I thought this song could have been a pop punk single, like a new modern pop punk kind of single, but this song is catchy. It's got everything going for it. It's a great lead single. It's a very good song. It has that Dancing With Myself sample, I guess you could call it, and yeah, it's a really good lead single. The album opener is called The Adults Are Talking, which has some really fast-paced kind of riffs behind it, and it's sort of reminiscent. I want to say it's reminiscent a bit of like Two Door Cinema Club, like their style of fast-paced riffs, and not in the sense like Two Door Cinema Club, their albums tend to be very, very short and punchy indie songs. Like almost in some ways I feel like The Adults Are Talking is trying to combine these old school indie riffs with like this modern, like the song's not short at all. The song's like just under 5 minutes, I think. So it's like, it's quite an interesting dichotomy between having these traditionally fast-paced, pumping, sort of momentum bass indie rock riffs, and then having a longer song. But it's a great opener for the album. It really sets the agenda in that way, so I think it's a really good choice to put it there. Following that is Selfless, which in my opinion is such a beautiful track. There's some really, really produced vocals on this track, really processed vocals that add this really interesting electronic effect to the music. I particularly draw to vocals in music. That's sort of the instrument of choice for me, but I know a lot of people pay more attention to like the bass or the guitar or the drums or whatever. I always lean more towards the vocals as an instrument, as a storyteller. I find this very beautiful in its production, and I think it at some points it's kind of reminiscent to Radiohead and Tom York's style of just putting a little bit of processing on your vocals to like just give it a bit more hit, and not shying away from the fact that it's so obviously processed. Like that almost becomes part of the narrative of the album, I suppose. So I really enjoyed that. I think if there are 3 artists I can draw from that I'm familiar with that I saw like bits and pieces of influence potentially in this album, were like artists like The Killers and LCD Sound System, and the more like rockier kind of Radiohead stuff, but still in like the mid 2000s or the early 2000s era of Radiohead. I got a lot of vibes for The Killers, particularly in the later track, Why Are Sundays So Depressing, which definitely has some Brandon Flowers-esque vocal lines and that deeper kind of strong vocal prowess coming out, that almost like that showbiz style of vocals that you sometimes get a bit of in The Killers music. I think there was a little bit of that here that I really liked in that track. Not every track on the album quite did it for me. There's a song early on called Brooklyn Bridge in the chorus, which I found pretty mixed. It has this like really weird retro 80s vibe synth intro riff that I just thought was a little bit overkill, and I thought it was almost clumsy sounding. Like, I don't know. I don't know if they were trying to take the piss out of 80s riffs, but it was so like staccato and jilted, and I didn't particularly like it. However, then this like shredding guitar comes in with its own little riff that really like, I don't know, adds a bit to the song. Again, a little bit of like Killers, Hot Fuss kind of vibes in this track as well. I think Brooklyn is saved by the other instrumentation that comes in around that synth, and the synth does come back. The song sort of resets in the middle and that synth comes back, but I think the rest of the instrumentation around it salvages that track. I can't say the same for the song At the Door, which is definitely the biggest miss on the album, which is like almost 8-bit style synth behind quite a lovely vocal, but I just think the electronicness of that riff juxtaposed with this like really nice vocal just didn't quite fit. I just felt like it was constantly clashing. I didn't enjoy that clash. I really don't like this song very much at all. I leave it on when I listen to the album, but I don't enjoy this song. I don't think it's particularly well put together, but I mean, I'm not really sure why they made this choice to have this like it almost sounds like, you know, the music that you'd hear in a Super Mario game on the Super Nintendo, you know, that really electronic synth sound. And yeah, I just, this one never quite hit it for me. The final track on the album, which is called Ode to the Mets, is a very long song. Again, most of the songs on this album are over 5 minutes in length, which is interesting because a lot of them do tend to sort of drag a little bit, but there's always a bit of momentum in the instrumentation that keeps them going and keeps you interested. Ode to the Mets to me is definitely the most LCD Sound System-ish track on this album. Like, I feel like there's some really dreamy sounds, some really dreamy vocals, those almost like those really tired vocals that you'd hear in an LCD Sound System song. I do enjoy this track. It is quite long. I don't know if I'd come back to it much, but I do like that almost glittery production style, that like, it's like a lot happening, but it's all kind of dull and a bit compressed, but I mean that in a good way. It's like this illusion of like really grandiose, a lot happening, these dreamy, glittery production styles that you'd hear on something like The American Dream, which is the most recent LCD Soundsystem album. It just sort of works together. It is a really long song, though. I don't know how often I'd revisit it on its own. I do think that the song Eternal Summer is such a blast to listen to. I've heard mixed things about this song, but personally, I think it's great. Again, it has these incredibly produced and processed and dreamy vocals that you heard earlier on the album, but they're mushed in between these more aggressive moments, these more aggressive vocal moments that are totally different to each other. These really light, floaty, dreamlike produced vocals against these really rough, aggressive middle breakdown sort of sections in the song. This song's really fun to listen to, and I really like this one. It's long, it's I don't know, I think this is one of the stronger ones on the album. I guess the main point from this review is that I think that labeling this album as the new abnormal is a really good decision, because it totally subverts your expectation and gives you a reason to accept the music as something different to what you may understand the Strokes have been in the past. So I think setting it up that way is a really good decision. And I really like this album. It's definitely like on the front running for being one of the best albums of 2020 for me personally. I'm really enjoying it. I'm spinning it a lot. Bad Decisions is a track I'm coming back to a lot. It's a great commercial pop rock kind of song, and I think it deserves any success it has. But I think the album around Bad Decisions is really fun to listen to and spend a bit of time with. So yeah, definitely give this album a shot. I really like this album. In the meantime, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to do as many videos as possible, but it's sometimes hard between work and everything else. I do a lot of reviews of music, movies, games, TV shows, all the kind of pop culture that I'm consuming, and I do 2 podcasts. One's called 20th Century Boy. It's sort of about my life as a radio and podcast producer from Melbourne, Australia, and the many blunders of my life as a millennial, sort of living by myself as a young adult in this crazy world. The other one's called Popped, a pop culture podcast where there's a bit more introspective analysis of different pop culture things, sort of like this review, but with another friend of mine who's a great co-host to me as well. Then I have a band called Release the Sounds that is not nearly as good as The Strokes, but I'd love for you to check it out. It's like a comedy, punk rock, satirical band. Our first song's about a guy who falls in love with a puppet, so definitely check that out if you want to support me. Otherwise, subscribe, like, comment, get the engagement up. Thank you so much for watching. My name's been Radio Mike. This has been The Inside of My Mind. Catch you later.
I hold you close the moment last I touch your skin, but I went to run my hand through your hair and I noticed you were attached to string. You were a puppet this whole time, you were attached to string. You were a puppet this whole time.